Don't you dare.
Pleasures I have in the entertainment.
You got to be kidding me.
This year, the theme is top 10.
I'm not mad. I'm Jane.
Hello, how are you? Oh, I'm making it. All right. I love you too.
I know you probably forgot about it, but you know, I was still, you were going to kind of look and see what you could find.
Oh yeah, Paul and yep. Thanks for reminding me. Yes. Did I get it? Yes. All right, good evening. We are studying Psalm 3 tonight. We started a study, it's been a little while, but we had Vacation Bible School, and then we had our song service last week, so we've just now made it to Psalm 3. So everybody open your Bibles and turn to 2 Samuel 15. Remember whenever I started the series on Psalms and I said most Psalms don't have much context? Well, this one does. So let's turn to 2 Samuel 15. We'll read a few verses here, be reminded of this context, and then we'll move into Psalm 3. In 2 Samuel 15, David, of course, is the author of Psalm 3, the writer of Psalm 3, and what we find, if you remember David had a son. His name was Absalom. What do we know about Absalom?
Long hair.
He rebelled against his father and tried to have him killed. Right? Killed his brother. And David's kids, well, let's just put it this way. David didn't do so good with his kids. There's some issues with all of them, it seemed like. And Absalom takes the cake, takes the top of the list. I mean, he wants to have his father put to death. It was Saul's daughter, I believe. What's her name? Micah? Anyway, why you gotta ask questions like that? Don't have me. We'll get to it.
When Micah promised Saul,
Saul, yeah.
then Saul gave Micah to somebody else, and then later on, David claimed Micah.
Let's read 2 Samuel 15. You're getting me off my topic here. We're going to read verses 1 through 17, and that'll give us some context. It's actually chapter 15 through 18, but for the sake of time, we're not going to read that in class. If you would like to keep that for later, 2 Samuel 15 through 18, you can read that. That's all about David and Absalom's interactions here. But let's begin reading here. If someone would read like verse 1 through 6, Brian, you want to do that for us? 2 Samuel 15, 1 through 6, and then Jerry, if you want to read 7 through 17. And I chose that just because that's how my Bible has those two sections divided. Go ahead, Brian.
After this, Absalom got himself a chariot, horses, and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you." Then Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel.
How far?
17.
And it came to pass after 40 years that
4 years.
Four. It says 40.
It's 4. Yeah, it's 4. It's it's a difference in translations, but regardless, go ahead and finish reading. Yeah.
Never seen that before.
Well, what it says here is the Septuagint Hebrew translation says 40, and that's why some translations say 40. But the Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I want to check it something. Huh. ASV says 40 also.
Mm-hmm.
Let me get back to this. Then Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebrew. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, and I will serve the Lord. And the king said unto him, Go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem. They were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he suffered sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. And there came a messenger to David, saying, The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him in Jerusalem, Arise and let us flee, for we shall not escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly, and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servant said unto the king, Behold, thy servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king shall appoint. And the king went forth, and all of his household after him. The king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. And the king went forth, and all the people after him, and tarried in a place that was far off.
All right, well, in the Hebrew numbers, we're going to run into a similar situation that we would run into in English numbers, and a 4 and a 40. And if a translation gets, or a manuscript gets smudged or something like that, it can be easy, right, to see a 4 or a 40, and it maybe take one of them. Now, whether it is 4 or 40 here, what does that change?
Nothing.
It changes how old they are, but that. Yeah, 4 does make more sense. That's why I said. Yeah, 40 is a long time for David to go without knowing or realizing what's happening. 4 is a long time, and we'll talk about that later, but 40 is a long time. Regardless, that, like I said, the only thing that changes here is their ages. It doesn't affect anything, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. But have you ever... have you ever really just felt like defeated, felt down? Have you ever felt like you were all alone, like the walls are closing in around you, everyone is against you? That's how David feels. Let's turn back over to Psalm 3. And if you want to mark 2 Samuel 15, we'll come back in a little bit, look at a couple of those verses again. But that's how David feels as he's writing this. I mean, how would you feel if your son wanted to take your place, is usurping your position? And not only that, in order to do so, he's trying to have you killed. How must that feel to have your child turn against you in this fashion? I can't imagine. I hope I never have to face anything like this, but David did. And what Absalom would do, and this is a conniving individual, manipulative individual. When he decides one day, I'm going to get a chariot, and I'm going to get 50 men to go out in front of me, in front of my chariot, so everywhere I go, I look super super important. All right, so everybody sees me and going about like this. Well, David must have given Absalom an awfully important position. And so now he's at the gates in the mornings. And where do people go to have their problems dealt with? To get judgment on issues that they're having at the gate. And so when people would come from out in the country who didn't spend a lot of time in the politics of the city, and that he would catch it, oh, hey, where are you from? Oh, that's a shame. There's no delegate for your area here, and your problem just can't get fixed. You know, if I was in charge, I'd make sure everybody's problems got fixed. Yeah, and here's the thing. Could he do that? Could he himself, even if he were king, handle everybody's problems all on his own? No. He's making promises that he can't keep, right? Now, you could delegate, and David had ways for people to come and have, those people who came to the city to have their problems dealt with, that Absalom was cutting off and telling them there was somebody that could have dealt with their problems. But Absalom is convincing all of these people that if he were in charge, things would be different. And he cared for, and whenever people would thank him and want to pay homage to him, oh, he'd run up to them and he'd hug them and kiss them on the cheek and just be so friendly to them. He's kissing babies, right? And shaking hands. He's out there politicking. And the more time goes on, the more important he looks, until eventually he gets 200 soldiers to go with him and proclaim that he's the one that's in charge now. And at this time, David's friend comes to him and lets him know, hey, we got to get out of here because Absalom has rebelled against you, and they're going to take your life. And so that begins this. That's where, and I don't want to say that's where this psalm begins, because it's really later on, after things have happened, after David has been hiding, David has had all of these interactions and with the people, and with people murmuring about David, saying things about David in the public square and in the homes, and all kinds of gossip about David, and oh, God has left David. God's not really there for David anymore. He used to be, but no, he must be with Absalom now. Now let's read Psalm 3 and see if we can put that picture, that image, everything that's going on with David in our minds as we read this. My heading begins with a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. So he's fleeing. We can picture him hiding from his own son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept, and I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of the many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Jerry, did yours say 10,000? Verse 6. Anybody says 10,000? Yeah. The word is actually myriads, which is just a large number. The point is many thousands of people are around him, against him. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be on your people. Now, this is a really just the perfect example of a psalm. The way it begins, the content of the letter, and the way it ends. The way it begins, and not every psalm begins this way and ends this way, but many do. begin with woe is me, and then in the middle it's how God has and will care for me, and the mood has completely changed by the end of the letter. Have you ever tried writing like this? I'd encourage you to try writing like this. Just thinking of some issue you're facing in your life, something that's going on, get it all out, how frustrated you are, how hopeless it feels, whatever you're feeling, and then think about how God has provided for you. And not just you, because a lot of the Psalms look back on all of Israel, right? All that God has done for His people. And then what's the conclusion that every person must draw that believes in what God has said? God is my salvation. It's exactly what Michael was talking about tonight. It's not about all this stuff here. It's not about the hardships we face here. Psalm 23, God is able to prepare that table for us in the midst of our enemies. He's blessing us in the middle of all of the things that we are having to go through in our lives. So David has fled here, and he has begun by expressing his despair, his sense of loss. But the true message, well, let me ask you, what do you think the true message of this psalm is?
Trust in God.
That's it. Trust in God. True peace, true comfort, where are they? I mean, think about what David is. This is a nightmare, right? I mean, can it get much worse than your child wanting to kill you? Take your place? I mean, think about what you must be feeling at that point. Failure as a parent, for sure, but also just betrayal, guilt, shame. What do other people think of me that my son would want to do this to me? So much going on in David right now. David learns of his son's intentions, and he responds by saying, "Arise, let us flee." Let us flee. That was verse 14. So David fled, and he's probably angry too, longing for home, worried about the rest of his family. If he'll do this to me, what will he do to my other kids, my wife? And so he begins with this loss.
David had the power. He could have slew Absalom if he wanted to.
Yeah.
He had the power to do it.
But what did he do? He fled. He fled. He could have. You're absolutely right. He could have done this, but it's almost like the same situation. There's some compare and contrast that could be done here, because he would do that with Uriah, right? He would flex his power for something, this worldly pleasure that he wanted. He wanted Bathsheba, right? So he uses his authority, his power there. But if we back up further, with Saul, what did he do? When he had the opportunity to rise up and slay him, he didn't do it. Why? Because this is God's anointed. So David here is making the decision to suffer the shame of leaving the situation, because he probably couldn't do that. As a father, he couldn't do that because of his feelings in this matter. We're going to begin with those first couple of verses here. I've put probing your faith here. We're going to look at some practical applications, but there in verse 1, he says, "How many are my foes? How many are my foes? Countless are my foes." and what has Absalom been doing for the last 4 years?
Turning people toward him and away from David.
That's right. And so the kingdom is full of people who David would at this point consider to be his enemies. So he feels overwhelmed by this number of enemies, and his son has declared war on him, forcing him to flee the kingdom. And then he would write in verse 2, many are saying of my soul, there's no salvation for him in God. Anybody ever question your faith? Question your Christianity? How'd that make you feel? I hate to sound like a counselor. How'd that make you feel? Not too good, right? Not too good. That can be a very difficult situation. I would imagine that would have caused some depressive thoughts. And really, what is David's greatest fear here? What are these people saying? There is no salvation for David with God. They are questioning David's very relationship with God. What's David's greatest fear? Not having that relationship with God. God would call David a man what? After his own heart. Even after David has done, committed some pretty atrocious sins in his life. But here, David is expressing himself and really his greatest fear here, speaking directly from his soul. And these words discourage him, the words that these people are saying, and when they question his relationship with God. And on top of all of that, Absalom's rebellion, David running for his life, people trying to chip away at his faith. How can he not help but ask that question? Is God still with me? And how many people ask that question? I know people have asked me, James, I'm not sure if God's with me right now because of just everything that's going on with me. We just studied Job not that long ago. The number of circumstances, difficult trials that we face in our life ought not cause us to doubt whether or not God is there. I mean, looking at Job, Job had circumstances upon circumstances piled against him, and God was still there with him. Satan wanted him to believe otherwise, but that was certainly not the case. And these are David's doubts, and and I think we can all probably identify with some of these. This next, yes, sir.
This is, well, I'm going to talk to something enough. David, we just talked about the man after God's own heart, and did a lot of good things. He kept building the temple because he shed so much blood.
Mm-hmm.
But his family, it was, I don't know what the proper word is,
Dysfunctional?
dysfunctional.
Yes.
And fast forward to today, there are a few excellent examples of families where the family has children that turn out to be very faithful.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the difference is?
Influences. That's just the first thing that comes to mind, because we can spend time training our children in the way that they should go, and what does Solomon say? They will not turn away from. Well, that's a proverb. It doesn't mean it's not a definitive rule that it can't happen. If I train up my child in the way that he goes, that doesn't take away his right to think and function and do whatever he wants to do. But what does happen is, even if I've trained my child the right way to go later on down the road, who's influencing him? Who's he spending time with? And hopefully, if I've trained him in the way that he should go, he won't spend his time with individuals like that. But sometimes Satan is able to creep in through the cracks. And his sons, yeah.
priest that he served, and his two sons, being not good people. And, yet, their fathers seem to be acceptable to God.
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess, like I said, it was off the subject here, but it's something I thought about, think about quite often.
Yeah, and and it's like, I guess it brings me back in my mind to the fact that God doesn't expect us to be perfect fathers. He expects us to be faithful and trying, and we're going to stumble. We're going to make mistakes, and we have to remember that the mistakes we make are impacting others, sometimes others more than ourselves. And so we have to work really hard to stay on the path. But even here with David, after raising these children and in his old age, God's still with him. And so we have opportunity to repent, but repenting doesn't remove the consequences of the way that we've lived. I know there are a lot of consequences in regard to David and Bathsheba.
But you read Kings, and that pattern is all through Kings.
Yeah.
Good father, bad son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can have like Hezekiah, this good king, and those before him, those after him, not so great. Yeah. Or look at Noah, and or Aaron, and his sons. Yep. Okay, so this next section, we'll call it protection with God, and this is verse 3. So David's going to pause a little bit here to consider the problem rather than quitting. Right? He's not giving up. He's not quitting. He says here, but you, O Lord. See, if all you were able to read is verses 1 and 2, you might say, boy, he's given up. Right? It's really bad for him, but that's not where this psalm ends. He says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. And really, if you were going to focus on one word in that verse, what would it be?
Shield.
That's exactly right. But it's not the word I want us to focus on. That's the word I wanted you to say, okay? Because shield, God is our shield, and that's important here. But the word I want us to look at is about. In battle, a shield's important, right? And during this time, a shield's important. So you didn't get... That's 3 minutes early. He's 3 minutes early, Ed. There are. Oh, I thought there was one that was rung before. Oh, okay. We're going to have 3 bells tonight. You're okay. We'll just let everybody know that you wanted to take it back. Anyway, a shield is important, right? A shield's important. But because somebody coming to attack me can come at me, and I've got this shield and I can block it. But what's protecting me on my back? What's protecting my sides? What does David say? This shield is about me. What's he saying? He says, God is not my shield in the front. He's not a shield in the back. He's a shield all around me. All around me. I am protected by God all around me. He begins with saying, my foes are so many. What am I going to do? People are saying I have no salvation in God. But God is a shield all about me. He's going to protect me. There's nothing getting through to this shield. The next word here that I'd like to focus on is glory. Glory. What kind of glory does a king have? I mean, he's got his throne, right? He's got his kingdom. He's got all of his subjects and all of his lands and all of his wealth and all of these things. I mean, that's why people came from all over the world to visit Solomon, right? because of his riches and his wealth and all that he had. People came to see it. David says, what's his glory? God is his glory, right? How many of those kingly glories does David have right now? Big fat 0. But really, looking through David's life, how often did David give credit to God for all of the glories that a king would have?
All the time.
Always. Always. From the time he was little, when he slew Goliath, until the end of his life, he always gave the credit to God for the glories in his life. And now, when he has none, he's still giving God the glory. And I want us to go back to this point next week and think about it, because usually it's people aren't thinking about all of the wonderful things in their life, all of the glory of God, when that thing just cut out, right? When all the stuff's gone.
It cut out, but the time's up.
Oh yeah, that's got to be what it is. But when we lose our house, when we lose our job, when we lose our car, when we lose our spouse, when we lose our children, when we lose things, is that when we glorify God? No. No. That's when people question God. But that's not what David's doing. Brother Burton had our closing prayer. I'll go. Oh, Brother Ed's going to lead us in our closing prayer. Thank you for your attention and comments. We'll begin right here, Psalm 3, verse 3, next week.
Oh, if I can only take back the spoken word so many times. Let's go to God in prayer. Father, we come together to honor you, to be reminded of the power that you have and the goodness that is available to us. Help us, Father, to make that our number one objective in our life, to be acceptable to you, to be faithful to you, and also to be examples to others and to be ambassadors, Father. Help us to let those be our life work. Be with us now, Father. Protect us as we go home. We ask all this, Father, in Christ's name. Amen. Amen.
That's plenty.